Okay, I have 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, so I think we will get started. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's special webinar delivered on behalf of the Extension Disaster Education Network. The Extension Disaster Education Network is a professional development committee organization that is hosting this webinar today. My name is Joyce McGarry. I am a food safety educator for Michigan State University Extension. Please take a moment to drop your name and institution in the chat box so we know who is with us today. Today's presentation is Epidemic Preparedness for Community Organizations, a Facilitated Process. And our speaker is Becky Koch from North Dakota State University. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel. I'd also like you to note that this webinar is being recorded. I have included a link in the chat box for the webinar evaluation survey, so please take a moment to complete the evaluation at the conclusion of this webinar. Becky Koch is the Agriculture Communication Director at North Dakota State University. She has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Ag Journalism and a Master's of Science degree in Ag Education. She uses her communication skills to teach through Extension. She has developed several packaged programs that provide all the resources needed to teach or facilitate a topic. Becky is also an Eden Charter member and past chair. Now I will present Becky Koch. Thank you, Becky, for joining us today on this very timely topic.
Thanks so much, Joyce. I really enjoy sharing with Eden. It has been a delight to work with Eden since before it was Eden. As Joyce said, I am the last even charter member left of Eden, but my retirement's down the road too. So when Eden is 26 or whatever years old, time flies. But thank you for joining us today, because this is a topic that obviously is hot at this time, and little did we know how important of a topic it was going to be when this was first developed. So my goal today is to just introduce this program to you so you feel comfortable facilitating it. But overall, the goal for the program is to help community organizations develop preparedness plans for their organizations, but also for the community, and how all the community organizations in a community can work together to be better prepared for an epidemic. And some of you are probably already saying, well, too late now, but you know what? Now may be the time to get their attention, and they can document what they've learned so far working with the current pandemic, and also go, oh shoot, I wish we'd have known whatever, or we should have thought about whatever. So really it might be good timing, or maybe after things settle down a bit more, or whatever the case may be. But again, the goal is for us as Extension educators to facilitate this project, or this program process, that's what I was trying to say, to facilitate this process with community organizations to help them and their community as a whole be better prepared for epidemics. So that might include representatives from United Way, from faith-based organizations, from VOAD organizations, voluntary organizations active in disaster, from all kinds of community organizations like that. So to start off with, epidemic preparedness for community organizations isn't your typical extension educational program, because we know most of us can't talk without PowerPoints, and granted this has PowerPoints, but most of it is us giving information to our audience, but this one truly is a facilitated discussion. So there are other programs that work with epidemic preparedness, and I encourage you to check out the Eden Family Preparedness and Surviving a Disaster programs too. Those are more the traditional teaching type programs, where this one is a little bit more of a facilitation program. So just a little background for all of you. This program was originally developed as Pandemic Preparedness for Faith-Based Organizations. In fact, if I understand correctly, and I doubt if there's anybody else left who can say otherwise, but what I heard was the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention actually approached Eden and said, we would like to work with you to develop this pandemic preparedness for faith-based organizations. And it was very specific, very narrow to that. A few years later, Eden realized that it needed to be updated. And so there were a little bit of Eden funds available. So a freelancer here in the Fargo area and I worked together to update it. It originally was just the 2 sections, 2 modules that we'll talk about here in a minute. But we added a 3rd one, more of the recovery and bringing things back together, even though the title is preparedness. But we thought it was important to close that circle there. So we were so excited. I don't remember which Eden meeting it was, but I took this new updated program to the Eden meeting, and the first thing I heard was, well, it's too narrow of a focus. Instead of just pandemic, you need to expand it to epidemic. And get this, it's because they said, you know, the chances of us having a pandemic are really slim, but epidemics, we have those quite often. Well, little did we know. So that's why we expanded it from just pandemic to epidemic. And I'm assuming everybody who's involved with Eden in any way, shape, or form knows that a pandemic is even more widespread globally, where an epidemic might be more regionalized. But the Eden delegates at that meeting also recommended it be expanded from just faith-based organizations to broader community organizations, which of course includes faith-based. So that's why this whole program went from being pandemic preparedness for faith-based organizations to epidemic preparedness for community organizations. So that took another few months to get that updated, but finally we have a program. And I'll tell you right now, I'm in the process of updating it again, because obviously a year or 2 ago, all of our examples were influenza. And so we're starting to incorporate coronavirus as examples, and that will be an ongoing process. So that's the nice thing about Eden educational materials. We can continually update them, have them on the web here, so hopefully you have the most up-to-date information for you to use. So as we go through this program, I can't see the chat, but I have asked Joyce and Abby to go ahead and interrupt me if there are questions or comments in the chat pod, because I truly want this to be a discussion. I don't want it to be a lecture. So turn off your mute and speak up and say, hey, wait a minute, what about this? Or how about this idea? Because I truly want this to be a discussion. So please, please interrupt me. And I don't mind dead air, so I'll stop every once in a while and give you that opportunity. And be quiet till somebody else speaks up. So to find the epidemic preparedness for community organizations, let's just start at the Eden homepage. And there are a couple ways to get there. Right now, easy way is to go directly from the feature on the homepage banner. Since this is such an important topic right now, thanks to Abby and Cheyenne for featuring the epidemic preparedness for community organizations right as one of the options on the homepage. However, if that eventually goes away, easy way to get to this resource is to click obviously on the resource dashboard. And if you know what you're looking for, which obviously I do, I think it's faster to just simply go to epidemic preparedness and search the resources. And there you go, right there. Epidemic preparedness for community organizations, such as faith-based and nonprofits, how essential they are, and this will work you through the process. So again, our goal today is to make you familiar with the program so you feel comfortable facilitating it with your community organizations. So let's just go look at the webpage. A little bit of an introduction, as in all of the Eden courses, just to give you a little bit of background. I'll try not to make anybody dizzy by going through this too quickly. But epidemic preparedness is divided into 3 sections. Section 1 is reducing illness and death from an epidemic. And ironically, when we were working on this section, it was topics that a lot of people weren't familiar with, like why it's important to wear a mask, how long you should wash your hands, what social distancing means. And you're probably all laughing now because this is just part of our vocabulary now. But 2 or 3 years ago, some of those were new concepts to people. And so section 1 is a background about learning about epidemic diseases and infection control and things like that to support our communities as individuals. Section 2 is really the community part, understanding the potential impact of an epidemic for your community and creating that plan. That's the biggest difference. This isn't just learning about something, but this is getting them to develop a plan. And we'll talk about that we'll talk about that more here in a minute, rather. And then section 3, which was added since the CDC original version, was putting your community back together and how your organization can close that circle and try to bring things back to a new normal, that rebuilding. Each Eden course just provides people with a little bit of background, whether that be extension educators or, since my name's on this webpage, I've had others contact me and say, hey, may I use this? It's like, absolutely. That's why we have it on a public website. But this gives a little bit of background. Just, you know, there's no cost to use the materials, but, you know, if you have to rent a space or pay for printing or whatever, there may be some local costs if you charge people to take part in this in person. It's very, very flexible. In fact, I worked with some Florida educators a couple weeks ago, and we started brainstorming about how this would be pretty easy to do virtually. Do section 1, or maybe even ask the participants to watch the recording of section 1 before a Zoom or similar meeting, and then talk through it and start working through some of the templates. And then a week later, okay, watch section 2 before we meet next week, and then we'll go through section 2 together. And the same with section 3. So even though I'll admit I don't know of anybody who's done it yet, I can really see how this program could be facilitated virtually, especially since we're all getting so good at Zoom meetings, right? We're all pros at it now. So the course basics is just a little bit of background to provide that information in case you don't feel comfortable or understand how Eden courses work. The next thing that's available is just simply some promotional materials. There's that logo in the size of the header, the web button, there's an email letter that you can just copy and paste to send out to organizations in your community, inviting them to participate. Although this is in Word, and most of these things are in Word. Some of them we saved as PDFs just so they wouldn't be such huge files to download. But we want you to be able to personalize them for your needs. However they work for you, feel free to tweak it. So any questions or comments so far before we jump into the resources that are actually available to you besides the promotional resources? Dead silence? Any questions or comments so far?
Nope, not yet, Becky.
Okay, I'll keep rolling. Like I
I will
said,
let you know.
I don't mind dead air, so I'm going to ask, in addition to Joyce, bringing them to my attention. So the course materials on the new Eden website, which I'm still getting used to, are over in the right-hand column, and they're in the middle here, and they're at the very bottom too. So Abby tried explaining to me why that is, but it's beyond my comprehension. I'm just going to use this middle one. So let's go to the instructor guide to just show you what that is. It's an introduction. Notice there's an instructor guide for each section. There's the instructor guide for section 1, instructor guide section 2, instruction guide section 3. And then there's downloadable PowerPoints also for each section.
And Becky, there was a comment from Cheryl that she modified a version as a webinar for the Wisconsin Council of Churches on March 10th and never imagining what was to come.
Oh, what timing. That's awesome. Glad to hear that, Cheryl. I wish I'd have been on top of it like you. I didn't start getting involved with United Way and some groups like that until things were really going crazy. And we all agreed it's too late now. We just are dealing with the day-to-day. So that was awesome. And I'd be eager to hear more from you about how that went. So great. And that sounds like a perfect audience to work with too. So you probably don't need to see a lot of this, but for everybody else, I want to show you just what kinds of resources are available to you. So the instructor guide, the introduction is just very, very basic. Notice we're updating it in May of 2020, even though the last version was in June of 2018. But we will continually, include and incorporate coronavirus information as examples. So again, if people aren't familiar, just a little bit of background on the goals and the target audience, the contents, a little bit of the strategy, just things you need to think about. Here's where your materials are. Obviously, you need a computer and a projector or a monitor or whatever. Just, you might want to have name tags. You might want to have it downloaded. I would highly recommend that rather than going live to the internet, although it's ideal if you do have internet access. What I haven't heard anybody say yet or not is if they have done what we truly recommend. And that is, whether you're in person or virtual, have people, these representatives from the community organizations, either bring their laptops or have their computers right in front of them so they can start the planning as they go through the process. If you're like me, you go to this wonderful training and you have the best of intentions, and then you go home and go, oh yeah, I need to get that done, and it never happens. So if we were in person, or even if it's over Zoom, I think it's great to give people time to at least start the template filling out, which you'll see in a minute. So that's why we really recommend internet access and encourage people to have their laptops or tablets at a live training, or at least in front of them as you're doing a virtual training. Just a little bit on layout you'll see here in a minute, and just a reminder, as you extension educators know, how to just review and practice the script so you can say it in your own words, and thinking about what questions might come up to prepare a little bit better. And of course, in extension, we have to have an evaluation. It's a very, very simple evaluation that's on the Eden website, but you are very welcome to personalize that. We do not have a national evaluation system, which we've talked about that for years and years, and we probably should, because every time we go to NIFA or somebody, they want evaluation data. And Florida is maybe helping me a little bit develop a better evaluation, because that is not my thing. So that's just the introduction that is provided to facilitators. Any questions, or I'll be very honest, since you're an Eden audience primarily, I'm going to ask you, is there information that you think should be added to this to help you facilitate?
Not seeing anything yet, Becky, in the chat.
Okay. We're going to go on then, and I opened so many things, I'm going to have to stop sharing and go to a different page, and we're going to go to, okay, I thought I had everything open. Here we go. Instructor guide. So this is an example. This is from section 2, Building Hope. I always want to say module, but somebody told us it should be sections because you really need all 3. So this is an example of what you as a facilitator would use to help you prepare and kind of the script. But again, I know you won't stand up there and just read a script. Downloadable PowerPoints are right there, so you can see what would be on the screen and some notes for you, providing some background information. Where's an example of questions for discussion? Obviously, kind of goals, objectives, here's what you'll be able to do or know, potential impacts. Well, I don't see one right now, but several places. Here we go. Here's just a note to the instructor, and this is perfect. So here's where you will want to hand out and work through one of the handouts with your group. This is a brainstorming activity, and this is why it works so well to have a group working through this together. Because once one starts saying, well, here's what our organization does for the community, or here's the targeted audience that we serve, then somebody else will say, oh, well, I didn't know you guys did that. Or, well, we kind of do that too. Maybe we should refocus our efforts, because as you talk, you go, well, who's serving this group, for example? And so that's why the facilitated discussion is almost as meaningful as the content itself through this program. So here's an example of where there's a note to the instructor. In fact, there's 2 of them right here next to each other. One handout, in fact, I think they're both just brainstorming, but on different focus areas. So this is what an instructor guide looks like. Any questions about how the instructor guide works or what's available to you there for your facilitation of this? Any comments, recommendations? Like I said, you guys, I don't mind dead air. Well, I thought I had everything open, and of course I don't. Whoops. Okay, share again. Some of these are Word documents that you can download, and here is an example where we just saw the note to instructor pull, and which one is this? One in the bottom left, you'll see this is handout number 2.1. So this is an example of just a brainstorming activity, thinking about the demographics of your organization, the adults, the children, the seniors, the special needs, and getting them to think about how would your organization be affected if 30% of your members became ill. So let's just say your faith-based congregation. What if 30% of the members became ill? And then, of course, if school-aged children become ill, that means a lot of parents have to stay home too. And we're seeing some of those examples right now. But how would your organization respond? And how would your response be affected if 20% of your staff and volunteers who provided services to others became ill? A good example of that right now is a food pantry. My sister is executive director of a nonprofit in Kansas City, Missouri. Immediately when the pandemic hit, AARP pulled all of their volunteers because they were very vulnerable. How is that community action councils supposed to serve the people who depend on them for food and things like that if they suddenly lose all their volunteers? My sister said, I wish I'd have thought ahead about that. But that's one of those things that this process and this brainstorming helps the group think through. And that's, again, an example of where somebody else in your community might say, hey, that is our job, to find you volunteers who can be available. So that's why it's so important to work together on this rather than just give a little lecture to a certain group. So that's an example of one of the brainstorming pages. Now let's go to and sorry there's so much jumping around here, but I want to show you the actual forms. Although they're not pretty, I'll be the first to admit. These are basic Word documents. We had them set up as beautiful PDFs with logos and everything on them. And then we decided it's just easier for some people who may not be as computer savvy, especially, to just fill it out for their organization if it's a basic Word document. So this is probably the major piece of the program that we hope you will facilitate your community organizations through. It's the Epidemic Preparedness, Response, and Recovery Plan for whatever group. Like any plan, we encourage them to date it and review it regularly. So the instructor guide and the PowerPoints take everybody through these steps. And I'm not going to open up the PowerPoints or the instructor guide for each one, but just to show you, the first thing a community organization should do is pull together some people in their organization. It may just be 2 or 3 people, a very small planning committee, but who's in charge of developing, maintaining, and putting into action this preparedness plan? Step 2 is thinking about that potential impact of an outbreak on your usual activities. Think about all of our organizations that have been impacted by coronavirus. So now I'm sure it'll be much, much easier for organizations to think about impacts than it might have been just 3 or 4 months ago. Step 3, which down through the document you'll see the specifics, but what are the contingency plans for those critical functions? And a lot of us say, well, everything we do is critical, but when you're short-staffed and short on volunteers, what truly needs to be done by your organization to serve your community? That's where, again, working together, you might find some duplication, you might find some gaps. Step 4 is, how are you going to communicate? How are you going to get information not just to your staff, but to your members and the people that you serve? Sometimes we forget about communicating with staff and we assume, well, we've got all their cell phone numbers, we can text or whatever. But of course, not so much in an epidemic or a pandemic, but if it's a natural disaster, what's the first thing to go? Cell phones. So think about the multiple ways you can communicate with all those different groups. And then step 5 is a crisis communication plan. Really the status of the epidemic and what you're doing, your organization. Thinking about people with special needs, whether that be the elderly, disabled, limited English speakers, whatever the case may be, and how you can help them prepare. Number 7, I think, is what's very important to this process, is working with those other organizations and agencies. Everybody finding their niche and making sure there aren't those big gaps. And then step 8 is sharing that information within your organization and outside your organization. So I'm just going to zip through here very quickly to show you some examples of going back to step 1 and the type of information that you need to document. Now, this is one of those do as I say, not as I do, because even our personal preparedness plans, our organizational preparedness plans, we need to get that kind of stuff written down. I'll admit, now that I'm planning retirement, I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't have any of this written down. It's all up in my head. And that's the motivation I need right now to get some of this written down. Just a second, please. So you can see there's just a lot of blanks here, but that's exactly what this is for, to help you make plans and to document who our contacts who our spokespeople are, what our critical services are. It's nothing fancy, it's nothing pretty, but it will help you facilitate this process for others. Who's the primary person for this function, and always who's the backup? What if you have to have social distancing? Then how are you going to carry out the function? Communications, of course, with my background, I think that's important. Who's your spokesperson? If that person's not available, who's your backup? So that's what these templates are. They just help walk people through the process to help them think about all the different things that should be documented. If you want to have a telephone tree, because again, not everybody will have access to texting. Sometimes it requires a conversation. So any questions about this template? Because that is a major piece of this whole program. As you look through it individually, I would encourage you to email me, and my email address is on the page, to email me with any suggestions you have for improvements. Like I said, I consider this a living document, and we want to continue to make it better for anybody who uses it. Now I forgot the name already. Cheryl, who used it already in March. If you have suggestions for improvements, please let me know. So any thoughts on that one? Oops, that's the document I already had open.
Hey, Becky, this is Reagan. Thank you so much for doing this.
You bet.
And I want to apologize that I read this document with great interest in January when you sent this out to us, and I sent it around, didn't get any response, of course, because nobody really thought anything was going to happen. But I empathize with how poorly we're responding to your questions, mostly I think because most of us haven't read it. And
That's
so
okay.
when you say, do you have questions, you haven't thought about it, stumbled through it. But I know that I thought it was golden back in January, but just the irony of the way these epidemic work, everybody was in such denial. I think they thought you were just crazy to even think about organizing. But I suspect that after people actually run through this, or, you know, this is that wonderful time post a fire when everybody wants to be a fireman. The conversations, the sooner they got started, probably the more rigorous they would be. And especially if we could do them in maybe groups of less than 10 or something like that. But I just wanted to thank you and apologize for the fact you must feel like you're just staring at a, you know, blank screen. So
no apology needed. No apology
carry on,
Reagan.
You always get great things going. And as I say, I can empathize because January 24th, I couldn't get anybody in my university to bite on the need for this.
I can relate. I hear you. I tried the same thing. And especially I keep going back to that Eden meeting. Oh, you know, you better broaden it to epidemic. We'll never have a pandemic. It's like, bite lip. So right. Who would have known? But well, yeah, now I think we have people's attention, and now it would be good to document the lessons learned. So not just a plan, but broader than that.
Absolutely. And so you inspire me that it's time to get back to work on that. So thank you very much.
You bet. So just to demonstrate a couple of the other documents, the recovery plan is another template. Nothing too fancy here, but again, determining what needs are in your community and the recovery plan, and just some logistical information. So this is the type of thing that I hope you as extension educators will just, again, and you're probably getting tired of me saying this, but facilitate the process. Share this with your local educators so they can facilitate the process. I mean, there's boring, empty pages like this, but what are the current conditions of your community organization? And making people truly think through those and write them down and document them. So I'm going to go clear back to, whoops. Share screen back to the whole homepage. Here, I said I wouldn't have too many things open, and now I do. There we go. Okay. Okay. Oh, don't you just hate it when people do this? Where in the world is, I just closed it. Okay, sorry folks. Too much junk open here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Becky, there is a suggestion,
Yeah.
Dawn,
Okay.
that maybe some more pre-filled prompts would help nudge discussions to fill in some of those templates.
And a lot of that discussion, I think, is in the instructor guide. So maybe not as much as you would want. So if you have specific suggestions, you're right. The template itself is very blank. The template is, but through the PowerPoints, as you show the PowerPoints as you go through, hopefully that would provide the prompts. That's my cop-out answer anyway. But you're right, if you have specific ideas, but the PowerPoints do truly say, here are some suggestions of what you might include. So that's why we recommend they have their laptop right there. And as you talk through the PowerPoints, say, okay, now spend 3 minutes filling out that part of the template. As we've talked about, who's going to be your spokesperson, for example, and then have them fill it out right there or draft it. I mean, it won't be a final, obviously, but yes, we do have those prompts in the instructor guide and on the PowerPoints. So obviously we're back here at the homepage. We've talked about what is included in an instructor guide. We've not looked at downloadable PowerPoints, but you know what those are. Here are the handouts. Those are the 2 brainstorming handouts, and the PowerPoints and instructor guide say specifically, go to handout, consider the impact, now pass out, handout, potential impacts, blah, blah, blah. Here are the 2 templates, which again, the PowerPoints do provide those prompts and walk you right through it. There's even a handy dandy certificate of completion that has an Eden logo on it and says you completed this. And there are 2 versions of the evaluation. But again, you're very welcome to tweak those to however you would like those to meet your needs.
And
So
there is another comment from Dawn about, for COVID, maybe we could brainstorm some things that we have been dynamically using our team here in Colorado for.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dawn, good idea, but this may be a new normal that needs fresh ideas.
That's a good point. And on one hand, I thought, you know, is this going to be so inappropriate that I shouldn't share this right now? On the other hand, I appreciate all the expertise from all of you to help make this a better program. So you're absolutely right. I'm going to quit sharing and let's just look at each other, because you've seen everything and you know where it is on the Eden website. So don't need to see that anymore. And now I'll actually be able to see the chat pod. So we've talked about the pre-filled prompts, which if you have other ideas for those to put on the template, please let me know. But once you look at the PowerPoints and the instructor guide, I think you'll see that those do kind of prompt there. You know, that's a good point about biasing by nudging too much. And you'll have to play that by ear with whatever group you're facilitating. Sometimes people just sit there like bumps on a log and you really do have to prompt them. Sometimes you have a group that's worked together before and they just go to town. So that just depends on your situation. But yes, any ideas from your states, please send them my way and I'd be glad to get this updated. What the new normal is, Lord knows. You're absolutely right. This may change drastically in the future. But again, I think it's so ironic. You could probably zip through the whole section 1 fairly quickly now, because when that was originally developed initially by the CDC and Eden team, it was stuff people weren't talking about. And now it's second nature to talk about social distancing, wearing masks, sneeze into a tissue or your elbow, all that kind of stuff that we just take for granted now, which was needing to be taught just a few years ago because people weren't aware of those things. So that's basically, again, what Module 1 is. And then Module 2 is developing the plan for preparedness. And then Module 3 is basically recovery. So that's exactly what I wanted to share with you today. Again, it's not a lecture. I don't consider myself to be an expert in this. I just wanted to make sure all of you knew that this resource was available and for you to use it as you best can when you facilitate it for your community organizations.
Becky, it's Reagan again. I'd love to have the group talk about timing. Now, I understand that, I understand that in one sense, it feels like it's too late to talk about it, and in another sense, it's too early. What are people's thoughts about the different kind of community groups and when you would talk about timing of when this would be good to do? I'm a preparer. I've learned to be a preparer with Eden, so I would have said that we should have talked about it in January. But what are people with more reasonable expectations thinking?
So this is Tamara Ogle with Purdue Extension, and I realized that I emailed you, Becky, a couple months ago, and I realized it had gotten hung up somewhere. So I apologize for saying this online, but we actually took the recovery template and focused more on the recovery versus the preparation with a statewide coalition that we have. So we kind of adjusted it with some Indiana resources, and then we've pushed that out to our local communities and are using our statewide coalition to say, model what you could be doing in your community. So bringing all these partners together to talk about community recovery. And so we seeded step 5 with thinking that they're going through this backwards, right? But it's always a cycle. We seeded step 5 with what have you learned? Hold on. What have you learned from this process that you want to capture and put into a plan for next time? Because there will be a next time, right? So we're kind of thinking of it as they're starting with recovery because that's what people are talking about right now. But what can they learn from the recovery process or from their response process that they can capture in a formal plan later on?
Awesome. That's a great idea. Thanks for sharing that, Tamara.
Becky, this is Cheryl Scolas, University of Wisconsin. So I can't say I had the great timing for March 10th. The director of the Wisconsin Council of Churches was the one who, on February 28th said, we need to do something, and she had online found the course. And so I would, love to go back now and do just what Tamara said, is take and look at that recovery part. Because I think for a lot of our organizations and that out there, it's how do we proceed and what were those great lessons learned. And I even was thinking the other day that I should go back to the director and see what they wanted to do. But I think what just even taking and doing a short webinar with these resources allowed me to do with the Council of Churches was give them a first step into the planning. Most of them asked if they could get the webinar recording by that night because they were going to be meeting with their council and they wanted to start working on those plans and share that with the council. So I think that was an important lesson for me, was that you have those individuals that are there to get the information, but they're looking to take it back to, their council, their executive board. So for some of you, it might be a good opportunity to plan, if you do this in a group setting type of a thing, that it might just be those key individuals and they might not be willing to get right onto the typewriter because they're looking for that next step of taking it back. And I think with some work, it easily could be a virtual offering and phased out. So just wanted to share that. Thanks for your work on it.
You bet. Thanks for sharing, Cheryl. Other ideas? This is great. This is what I was hoping for, discussion. Can anybody imagine how you might use any part of it? Not necessarily a 1, 2, 3, but any part of it.
This is Margarita Terán from Illinois. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. It's very interesting, and I think what you know is never ever a good time, because some things you can do too early, and you are not completely prepared. Sometimes you're a little bit too late. And what I'm wondering is that there are many communities in our reach that they don't have the facility to have extension educators that are multilingual. And we have seen that in the meat plants, we have seen that in factories that are big and they have a diverse community, that they need somebody who can really present this information to them under a different type of leadership. And I'm just wondering, what are your efforts to do that? And I'm really happy as part of Extension in Illinois and doing some of those efforts, at least in Spanish or French Congolese, which is something that we have seen might be needed. But I just wonder if you have find out, that barriers, and how do you work around them?
Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have very few Eden materials that are translated into other languages. Some of your states have done a great job, and some of our other states always link to yours in your states. There hasn't been discussion about translating this one. However, if an organization was working with a targeted audience, that's the wonderful thing about Eden materials and most of our state extensions. We encourage others to use it. I know here at NDSU, in fact, I'm the copyright queen, and every time I get an email, may I translate this? I go, absolutely. My only request is you let us put it on our website then after you translate it, because we want to make it available to others. So if you know of a group that does want to use it, they may not officially translate it out all written. They may just verbally translate it with their audience. That's fantastic. We hope that this is available, and we realize that is a limiting factor, but if it can be used in any way, shape, or form with any of those necessary targeted audiences, we want to help make that available.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you for the session. It was very informative.
You're welcome.
Becky, there is some more chat in the chat.
Oh, I hadn't been looking over there.
I didn't know if you
Yeah.
wanted me to read it, or if you
No, I can see it now since I'm not
Okay.
sharing my screen.
So one of the things came from me,
Yeah.
and I was just curious if in this group, if we saw, as Becky did, I really appreciate your background and knowing that this was meant for the religious and the nonprofit sector, and then we expanded it to communities. But are there other audiences that maybe we need to look at taking this and adapting it for, such as agricultural audiences, or as our last asker said, some of those vulnerable populations like them in meat processing plants and such?
But there, I don't look at it as an ag audience. There, I look at it more of the people audience. It's not the fact that it's a meat processing plant. It's the fact of who is working at the meat processing plant. So when I think of ag organizations, and I'm very, very close to a lot of them, it depends on their mission, that fewer of them would carry out this kind of a mission. Where if it was, and I'll just use Fargo's example, if it's our Somali population who's working in the window factory, which we have a huge Marvin Windows factory, it's because of that. It's not because it's a window factory, it's because of the population that's working there, and how do we reach and teach them. So ag, I think we've got farmstead security and stuff that's a little bit different for ag. So this is one of the few things that, well, I shouldn't say few, but one thing that is really targeted towards the United Ways and the faith-based and the volunteer organizations and those groups. So it's not as ag specific, but it can be used with those audiences who might happen to work in an ag industry. Yeah. There again, the communities that are ag dependent, it just varies there. But yeah, absolutely, their focuses may be a little bit different. And it just depends on the community. That's why this is, again, I'm sounding like I'm making excuses, but that's why this is so generic. So you all can target it towards your community or your audience. Exactly. If you need to break it up and work only, like here in Fargo, we have the New American Center. So we might work specifically with our New American audience that includes the Bosnian population, the Somali population, and those groups, because they approach things a little bit differently and might not reach out to 211 and organizations like that for help. They might be more enclosed with their own group and might not realize the other resources that are out there and available to them. So again, it's designed, this whole program is designed to be tweaked to meet your needs and your community's needs. These are great ideas, you guys. I'm taking notes as I'm talking, which sometimes that makes me say something wrong or write something wrong, but other ideas of how this can be used or how it can be tweaked. No? Maybe people are just kind of processing and thinking about how they can use it, or how they can use it. Blah, you knew what I meant, how they could possibly use it or need to process a little bit more to think. Well, I'm a believer in not dragging out just because we said it's an hour and we have to go an hour, but I'm also not wanting to cut us off if there are more ideas for some discussion.
We certainly do have some time left in our hour if there are other comments.
Okay, if you need somebody to talk, Becky, I'll do it. It's Reagan again from CSU.
Go Reagan!
Yeah, you got it, guys. I think the biggest problem again is timing. Who knows where we are in this epidemic? Who knows? So many of the people that you would be talking to in the faith space, in the community, volunteers, etc., they're concerned about even coming out of their houses, much less Zooming to think about it. Because if you Zoom to think about it, then you're committing to doing something and you're committing to coming out. So I mean, nobody knows the answer to this, but there's no question that I think that's one of the things that leaves you just stunned. And yet, unless we start, I mean, I know I'm constantly explaining to groups because I'm a veterinarian that the disease process is not affected by your labeling it that we're in recovery or that we're still in the middle of the disease. The disease is going to do what it's going to do, and it's going to be opportunistic when it wants to be, etc. And just because we call this the recovery because some case numbers are down, we may not be in recovery. So those are things that I think just leave us speechless. And I don't even know how to even get my hands around it because nobody knows. Is it safe to come out and rebuild right now, or is it not? And I've been brokenhearted about my community's volunteers that are older, including me, that should they be coming out? And if I even try to get something like this going, am I serving them? So, I know in the beginning I was trying to encourage and it worked somewhat, I believe, work all those students that were online, that they should be in their communities because they aren't as much at risk, and they have got to be sick of being online. I think some of them did, some of them didn't, but we have to take that into consideration.
Absolutely. I mean, we educators talk about that teachable moment. Obviously, last December, January, nobody was concerned about this. By late March, it was too late and we were in the throes of it. And now I agree with you 100%, Reagan, about, you know, when is that teachable moment now? When is the appropriate timing to capture the lessons learned and plan for the next one? Mhm. And that even varies from community to community. Here in North Dakota, Cass County, which is where Fargo is the hot spot of the state. I mean, every day you look at the list and here's 75 cases in Cass County, 1 in Burley, 1 or 2 in this county, 1 or 2 here, and it's like, ah. So what we would do in our community right now is probably just hold off. It's still too crazy here. But other places across the state, it's like, oh man, we want to make sure we don't become Cass County. So it varies just within community to community or county to county, let alone state to state.
Right, right. And the trouble with infectious disease, the way they go, you can plan something, then 2 weeks later, it, you know, it can be, it can blow up. So
Yeah.
I just want to empathize that if anybody can figure out the right timing for this sort of thing, be sure to get me in on that email.
Good luck.
Thank you, Becky. I got to run to another one. I appreciate
You
it
bet.
so much. Take care, everybody.
You bet. Thank you to everybody for joining today. And I don't want to steal Joyce's thunder, but appreciate your feedback on the evaluation and appreciate any feedback on the program itself. So like I said, my email address and phone number are on the webpage and greatly appreciate any suggestions. This is an ongoing live document that we really appreciate your feedback on. And especially if you're able to use the resources, any part of the resources, I'd really be interested in your feedback on how it works and what we can improve to make it even more useful.
And the evaluation link is in the chat. We'd really appreciate that if you could complete that. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. And there is a reminder that this webinar will be archived at the Eden website and YouTube channel and distributed throughout the listserv. So please take a moment to complete the evaluation found at the link in the chat box. Hopefully we'll see you next month for the regularly scheduled Eden Professional Development webinar on June 9th. The presentation is entitled A Case Study of an Extension Response to a Severe Wildfire Season, Before, During, and After.